The sun was just beginning to dip behind the terracotta rooftops of San Benedetto, a postcard-perfect village nestled in the hills of southern Italy, when Mason slammed the car door and drove away, his laughter echoing down the narrow cobbled street. The taillights of our rental car vanished around a corner, leaving behind only dust and silence. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, my breath catching mid-sentence. We had been arguing, yes, but never in my worst nightmare did I imagine my husband would leave me. Tourists sipped wine at nearby tables, casting curious glances as I clutched my purse tighter, the weight of reality slowly sinking in. This wasn't just a scare tactic, this was real. Only hours earlier, I had begged him to stop drinking during lunch. His old college friends, buzzed and belligerent, egged him on, and now they were gone without me. The sky darkened as I wandered aimlessly past shuttered shops and sun-faded signs in a town whose name I could barely pronounce. I had 80 euros in cash, no passport, and no way to contact anyone back home. What had started as a romantic getaway had turned into something else entirely, an exile. By the time darkness blanketed San Benedetto, I was no longer holding on to the hope that Mason would return. The idea had melted away with the last light of the sky. I sat on a splintered bench outside a shuttered bakery, watching locals pass with the ease of people who belonged. I was a ghost, drifting, silent, invisible. My phone was at 12%. I had tried calling him 23 times. Each went straight to voicemail. I texted him. I texted his friends. Ryan, Connor, even Marco, the quiet one. Nothing. Blocked. All of them. It wasn't a drunken mistake anymore. It was deliberate. Planned. I checked my wallet. 80 euros and a few crumpled American bills. No cards. Those were in Mason's pocket, handed over for safekeeping earlier that day. My passport, in my purse, at least. One thread of control left. I found a dimly lit pension above a bakery, a tiny room with peeling walls, and a bed that felt like it was made of bricks. The elderly woman who owned the place didn't speak English, but when she saw the panic behind my smile, she pressed a hand gently to my arm. It nearly broke me. That first night, I didn't sleep. I sat with my knees hugged to my chest, staring at the cracked ceiling, trying to stitch together what had just happened. I replayed the lunch, the moment Mason's voice rose, the hurtful words, "You always think you're better than everyone. You control everything. You'll figure it out. You're the genius, right?" He'd said those things before, but this time he left me behind. The next morning, I bought a cheap sandwich and wandered through the town, looking for our tour group. Nothing. No signs. They'd gone on to Florence, I realized, and I hadn't even made the bus. I stepped into a tiny cafe, hoping someone might help. The owner, a middle-aged man with warm eyes, offered me espresso and tried his best English. He drew a map to the local police station. I went, filed a report. The officer nodded with sympathy, like he'd seen this before. Another woman discarded like luggage. It wasn't until the third day that something inside me shifted. I was standing outside a pawn shop. My wedding ring, 2 carats, upgraded on our 5th anniversary, glinted in the dusty light. I slid it off. My fingers trembled. The pawnbroker offered me far less than it was worth, but I nodded. He handed me a stack of euros. I didn't want to call my father or friends. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want the "I told you so's." I stood at the town's tiny bus station, staring at the destination board. Rome, Naples, Athens. One word caught my eye: Thessaloniki, Greece. A whisper of an idea began to form. Not escape. Rebirth. 14 hours later, I stumbled off a creaky bus in a seaside village in northern Greece. My legs numb and my soul frayed. The village name, painted in faded letters on a wooden sign, was impossible to pronounce. I didn't care. I'd made it. Somewhere new. Somewhere Mason would never think to look. The air smelled of salt and sun-dried herbs. My phone was dead. My money nearly gone. My feet blistered from walking in shoes meant for cafes, not cross-country wandering. I wandered uphill, dizzy, stomach hollow. That's when my knees gave out. The gravel scraped my skin as I crumpled to the roadside. I barely noticed. The world was spinning. Part of me thought, maybe this is it. Maybe I collapse here and disappear for good. But then, a voice cut through the haze. Soft, urgent, foreign, feminine. I felt warm hands lifting my shoulders. A canteen pressed to my lips. Water. Cool, real, grounding. I blinked against the sun, and an elderly woman's face swam into view. Deep-set eyes, full of concern. Silver hair pulled back neatly. Sun-worn hands cupping my face. "Eleni," she said, pointing to herself. "Charlotte," I whispered hoarsely, not even thinking about using a fake name. I had no strength to pretend anymore. Eleni helped me to my feet with surprising strength. She pointed toward a stone farmhouse tucked behind rows of olive trees. Too weak to argue, I followed. Inside, her husband, a man with a strong build and gentle eyes, greeted me with a nod. "Thanos," she said, gesturing to him. He offered a small smile, then disappeared into the kitchen. Eleni sat me at a wooden table, worn smooth by time. She handed me a bowl of soup, warm and earthy, that smelled of garlic and thyme. My hand shook as I brought the spoon to my lips. The first bite made me cry. That night, I stayed in their guest room, a small whitewashed space with a handmade quilt and windows that opened to the breeze. I slept like the dead. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of fresh bread. Eleni had left folded clothes at the foot of the bed, clean, simple cotton. I stepped into the kitchen, and she beamed at me, offering strong coffee and bread with honey. When I tried to explain, fumbling through Google Translate and gestures, she simply patted my hand and said one word, "Stay." I nodded. And just like that, the woman who had once been abandoned in a foreign country found something she never expected in another, a beginning. The days that followed settled into a calm rhythm I had never experienced before. Eleni taught me how to collect eggs without startling the hens, how to hang clothes so the mountain wind would dry them faster. Thanos patiently showed me how to tell oregano apart from look-alike weeds. At first, my body resisted. My hands, once pampered in Boston salons, grew raw and blistered. I spilled milk, dropped tomatoes, burned my fingers on the old wood stove. I felt awkward, like I didn't belong. But slowly something shifted. The pain became familiar. The daily chores turned into quiet meditation. For the first time in years, my thoughts stopped racing. There was no Mason hovering over my words. No pressure to keep up appearances or fill up a social calendar. In the evenings, I sat on the porch with Eleni and Thanos. He smoked his pipe. She knitted scarves with no one in mind. We rarely spoke. We didn't need to. The silence felt safe. One night, Eleni brought out an old photo album. She pointed to a young woman, her daughter, Sophia, now living in Australia. "Baby, no see," she whispered, eyes glistening. I understood then. Eleni wasn't just offering me a place to sleep. She was offering me a place in her heart. A connection I hadn't felt in years. Not with Mason, and not even with the friends I'd quietly lost along the way. I began waking early, eager to work. I laughed more, ate more, began to trust again. And slowly, I started to dream again. Not of the life I left in Boston, but of this life. A life where I wasn't an accessory to someone else's success. A life where my hands created, where I mattered. One morning, as we shelled peas, Eleni asked carefully in English, "Home? You go?" The question hit harder than I expected. I pictured our cold, curated condo. Mason tapping his phone. His constant reminders. His charm laced with control. I shook my head. "Not yet," I said softly. Eleni smiled. And in that moment, I knew. I was no longer just surviving. I was healing. Weeks blended into a quiet, sacred rhythm. The olive farm was no longer just a place to hide. It was becoming home. My body, once soft and unused to labor, now moved with purpose. I knew the groves like the back of my hand. One morning, as I stacked olive oil bottles in the small shed, Eleni and Thanos called me in. Sunlight spilled through the wooden beams as they stood side by side, holding a thin envelope. "You help, you care," Thanos said, his English slow but sure. "Now, we ask." Eleni took my hand. "No children here, no Sophia. This life, this farm, it needs someone." Her eyes met mine. "We want to teach you. If you stay, it can be yours too." I was speechless. This wasn't just kindness, it was legacy. That night, lying in the quiet farmhouse, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Possibility. Not just survival, not just healing, but a future I could shape with my own hands. At dawn, I joined Thanos in the grove and said simply, "Yes, I want this." From that day, I became more than a guest. I became family. Eleni taught me to manage the books, translating numbers into meaning. Thanos showed me how wind patterns shaped the flavor of olives, how soil told stories. I began adding touches of my own, redesigned the bottle labels, wrote a small brochure for the market, sharing the story of the farm, of Eleni and Thanos, and quietly, of myself. When Eleni saw the new label, she held it like a treasure. "Beautiful," she whispered, and for the first time in years, I didn't just feel useful, I felt chosen. The woman I saw in the mirror 6 months later was a stranger, and yet the most real version of me I'd ever known. My skin, sun-kissed and glowing, needed no makeup. My arms were strong from hauling baskets of olives. My hands, once soft and polished, now carried calluses and stories. I no longer flinched at early mornings or hard labor. I welcomed them. I rose with the sun, worked alongside Thanos in the groves, learned to read the trees like old friends. I could tell which branches were heavy with fruit and which ones were weary. I started predicting weather shifts by the way the wind curled around the hills. Eleni had become more than a mentor. She was family. We cooked together, laughed together, and shared quiet moments where no words were needed. I'd learned enough Greek to hold simple conversations, and the villagers who once saw me as a passing guest now waved warmly and invited me to coffee. My body had changed, but so had my spirit. Gone was the version of me who smiled through discomfort to keep peace. The woman who once tiptoed around a husband's pride and buried her own voice beneath his plans. She was no longer here. One evening, while packing for the market, I caught myself humming, a habit I hadn't had in years. Eleni noticed and smiled. "Happy," she said softly. I nodded. "Yes, very." At the market, I spoke with tourists in both English and my growing Greek, sharing stories about the olive oil, the trees, the land. Every sale felt earned. Every kind word from a stranger felt like healing. The villagers started to trust me with more, translating documents, helping with local events, even advising on design ideas for their small shops. One day, I realized I hadn't thought about Mason in weeks. The space he once took up in my mind had been replaced by sunlight, soil, and genuine connection. I wasn't just rebuilding, I was becoming. I didn't need permission to speak. I didn't need someone else's validation. I had found value in simplicity, in labor, in honesty, and above all, I'd finally found the one thing Mason had spent years convincing me I didn't need: myself. When Mason stepped out of the car, it was as if the past had arrived in pressed linen and polished leather. He hadn't changed, same confident stance, same air of entitlement. But I had. He didn't recognize it yet. I stood at the edge of the grove, hands stained with oil, hair tied back, boots covered in dust. Sunlight poured over the land that had become mine. "Charlotte," he said, eyes narrowing, "you've made your point. This little stunt has gone on long enough." Stunt. I walked forward, slow and steady. "You left me on the side of a road, in a country where I didn't speak the language. You blocked my calls. You never came back." He scoffed. "You always were dramatic." "No," I said, my voice like steel. "I was surviving." Mason glanced at the house, then at Eleni and Thanos, standing in the doorway like sentinels. They manipulated you. You don't belong here. I stepped closer, pulling an envelope from my back pocket. They saved me, something you never tried to do. He looked at the papers. What's this? Freedom. I handed him the divorce documents. Already filed. You're free to return to the world you care so much about. Appearances, control, and reputation. But I won't be part of it. His jaw tightened. You'll regret this. I laughed, genuinely. Mason, I regretted staying with you long before you left me in Italy. His expression cracked for the first time. You don't even look like yourself anymore. I met his eyes. Number I look like the woman I was supposed to become. Before you spent 10 years dimming my light. He didn't argue again. Maybe because he finally saw what stood before him. Not a wife waiting to be rescued, but a woman reborn. Without another word, he turned and walked away. Dust rose behind the car as it disappeared down the road, the same way it had months ago. Only this time, I wasn't the one left behind. I turned back toward the farmhouse, my farmhouse. Eleni reached out, taking my hand. Thanos nodded, quiet pride in his eyes. The wind moved through the olive trees like an old song. And for the first time in my life, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Sometimes, what feels like the end is really the beginning. Charlotte was abandoned, humiliated, and left to fend for herself in a country not her own. But instead of breaking her, the experience shattered the illusion of the life she thought she needed. And in that space, raw and uncertain, she discovered something she never expected: herself. Her story reminds us that freedom doesn't always come with celebration. It often comes through pain, through loss, through being forced to face the truth we've been too afraid to acknowledge. We all carry versions of ourselves shaped by others' expectations. But growth begins the moment we choose ourselves, even if it means walking away from everything we once thought was home. Strength isn't loud, it's quiet. It's choosing peace over chaos. It's rebuilding from ruin with your own hands. And sometimes, the person who walked away from you did you the biggest favor of all. If you've ever felt lost after betrayal, if someone walked out and left you doubting your worth, remember Charlotte's story. You don't need to be abandoned in a foreign country to start over. Sometimes, all it takes is one brave decision. To stop waiting for someone to save you and start saving yourself. Begin small, unplug, sit with your truth, reconnect with what brings you peace, gardening, painting, learning something new. Let go of what weighs you down. The road to healing doesn't require perfection. It only requires presence. And if no one believes in you right now, let this story be proof that you are enough. If you enjoy deep, emotional, and meaningful stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new update. Your support is the motivation that drives us to keep bringing you powerful stories. Once again, thank you for being here, and see you in the next story.